A little boy was swept away by the crowd outside Buckingham Palace, crying for his mother. The guard stood still, until one dangerous moment forced him to break protocol. What he did next left the crowd speechless and brought tears to their eyes. Here's how it happened. But before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Also, make sure to check out our second channel, Guard Patrol, linked in the pinned comments, because we upload daily at the same time on both channels. So subscribe to both and never miss a powerful story. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Buckingham Palace as Guard Lucian Redgrave stood at his post, his scarlet tunic a vibrant contrast against the ancient stone walls. 15 years of service, including 3 tours in Afghanistan, had taught him that true vigilance meant more than just standing still. It meant being aware of every subtle shift in the crowds that gathered daily before these historic gates. Through his practiced forward gaze, Redgrave first noticed them near the eastern entrance. A young mother and her son, their matching smiles suggesting a day of adventure ahead. The boy, who couldn't have been more than 7, clutched his mother's hand with the particular excitement of a child experiencing something magical for the first time. "Mummy, look how tall they are," the boy's voice carried across the courtyard, drawing gentle smiles from nearby tourists. "Their hats make them look like giants." His mother squeezed his hand affectionately, her own face reflecting the simple joy of watching her child's wonder. Redgrave's peripheral vision caught the subtle details that years of service had trained him to notice. The boy's carefully chosen outfit, clearly picked for this special occasion. The way his mother kept him close despite the relatively calm crowd, the shared glances between them that spoke of a deep bond. Even in the sea of tourists that ebbed and flowed through the palace grounds each day, there was something about their connection that stood out. "Remember what we talked about, Alex?" The mother's voice carried the warm tone of someone explaining something important. "The Royal Guards have a very special job. They protect not just the palace, but hundreds of years of history." Alex nodded solemnly, though his eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. "Is that why they stand so still, Mummy? Because they're protecting everything?" His small hand gesturing toward Redgrave's immaculate uniform, taking in every polished button and precise crease. Through his ceremonial stillness, Redgrave noticed the growing crowd around them. The afternoon tour groups were arriving, their guides beginning their well-rehearsed speeches about palace history. More families were filtering through the gates, their excited chatter creating a steadily rising tide of sound that experienced guards knew could quickly become overwhelming. "Stay close now, darling," Alex's mother cautioned, her grip on his hand tightening slightly as the crowd began to thicken. "It's getting rather busy." Her voice carried that particular note of maternal concern that Redgrave had learned to recognize during his years at this post, the sound of someone protecting their most precious treasure. The afternoon light caught Alex's face as he looked up at his mother, his expression full of that particular confidence only well-loved children possess. "Don't worry, Mummy, I won't let go." He patted their joined hands with his free one, a gesture that made several nearby tourists smile at its sweet solemnity. Little did any of them know that in mere moments this ordinary afternoon would transform into something none of them would ever forget. The crowd continued to grow, its movement like waves against the palace walls, as the hour approached one of the day's most popular attractions, the changing of the guard, and with it, the beginning of a story that would test the limits of duty, protocol, and the true meaning of protection. The first sign of trouble came with a sudden surge in the crowd. A tour bus had just arrived, disgorging dozens of eager tourists who pushed forward en masse, their excitement creating a ripple effect through the gathered onlookers. The changing of the guard was about to begin, and everyone wanted the perfect view. "Excuse me?" A large man shouldered past Alex and his mother, his camera held high above the crowd. More tourists followed in his wake, the human tide growing stronger with each passing moment. Alex's small hand, warm and secure in his mother's grasp, began to feel the strain of keeping hold as people pressed in from all sides. "Hold tight, darling," his mother called out, her voice carrying a new edge of concern as she tried to maintain their position. But the crowd had taken on a life of its own now, its movement dictated by the collective desire to get closer to the ceremonial spectacle about to unfold. A group of enthusiastic teenagers pushed through, their backpacks creating unexpected separation between mother and child. Alex felt his mother's grip weakening, her fingers sliding against his as the crowd continued its relentless movement. "Mummy?" His voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. "Just hold on, Alex, I've got you." But her words were cut short as another wave of tourists surged forward. Someone's elbow caught her arm, forcing her fingers to release their precious hold. In that instant, Alex's small hand slipped from his mother's grasp. "Mummy!" Alex's cry was almost lost in the general commotion. The crowd continued its inexorable movement, carrying him away from the last place he'd seen his mother's familiar face. Panic began to rise in his chest as unfamiliar legs and bodies pressed in around him, each movement taking him further from safety. "Alex!" his mother's voice called out, now somewhere behind him. "Alex, stay where you are. I'm coming." But the crowd's momentum was too strong, its flow too determined. Alex found himself being swept along, each attempt to turn back thwarted by the press of bodies around him. "Has anyone seen my son?" His mother's increasingly desperate voice carried over the crowd. "He's 7 years old, wearing a blue jumper. Please!" The panic in her tone was palpable now, drawing concerned looks from nearby tourists who began to realize something was wrong. Alex tried to push against the crowd's movement, but his small size worked against him. Each step he attempted to take backward resulted in being pushed 2 steps forward by the ongoing tide of humanity. Tears began to well in his eyes as the reality of his situation settled in. He was lost, truly lost, in a sea of strangers. "Check by the gates," someone called out. "Maybe he got pushed that way." The crowd's energy began to shift as more people became aware of the situation. Some stopped to look around, others called out descriptions, but the sheer number of people made the search difficult. "Alex!" His mother's voice was more distant now, coming from somewhere he couldn't see. The panic in her tone had turned to something worse, raw fear. "Please, he's only 7. Has anyone seen him?" Through it all, Guard Redgrave maintained his post, his exterior a picture of ceremonial stillness. But his trained eyes had caught sight of Alex's blue jumper as the boy was swept past, noting the tears beginning to stream down his young face. Years of service had taught him to observe everything, while appearing to observe nothing, and right now, every instinct, honed in combat, was telling him that the situation was about to become much worse. The crowd continued to shift and surge, its movement now complicated by those trying to help find the lost boy and those still focused solely on getting the best view. And somewhere in that chaos, a small boy's fear was about to encounter something far more dangerous than just being lost. Alex found himself in a forest of legs and unfamiliar faces, each passing moment taking him further from where he'd last seen his mother. The palace grounds, which had seemed magical just minutes ago, now felt vast and threatening. Everywhere he looked, he saw only strangers, some rushing past without noticing him, others too focused on their phones and cameras to see his distress. "Mummy!" His voice had grown smaller, less certain. The confidence of a well-loved child was giving way to primal fear as he realized how alone he truly was. Tears blurred his vision, making the crowd seem even more intimidating, like shadows moving in a nightmare. A tour guide's voice boomed nearby, making him jump. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll look to your right..." But Alex couldn't focus on the words. His heart was pounding too loudly in his ears, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He tried to remember what his mother had told him about getting lost. Stay where you are, find a safe adult, look for someone in uniform. Uniform. Through his tears, Alex's eyes locked onto the familiar scarlet tunic of Guard Redgrave, standing motionless at his post. The sight was like a beacon in a storm. Here was something he recognized, something that hadn't changed or moved in the chaos around him. His mother's words from earlier echoed in his mind. The royal guards protect not just the palace, but hundreds of years of history. Maybe, just maybe, they could protect lost little boys too. Alex began moving toward the guard, but the crowd's movement worked against him. Each step forward was a battle against the flow of people, his small size making it impossible to push through directly. He had to weave between legs and bags, occasionally getting knocked off course by someone's sudden movement. "Has anyone seen my son?" His mother's voice carried from somewhere in the distance, the fear in it making his heart ache. He wanted to call back, to let her know where he was going, but his voice seemed stuck in his throat. Everything was too loud, too confusing, too scary. A group of tourists with selfie sticks nearly knocked him over, none of them noticing the small boy in their excitement to get the perfect shot. Alex stumbled, catching himself against someone's leg, but when he looked up, the stranger was already moving away, too preoccupied to notice his distress. The guard's position seemed both impossibly far away and his only hope. Alex wiped his eyes with his sleeve, trying to be brave like his mother always told him. One step at a time, he told himself, just like the guards' march, one step, then another. Through his tears, he could see Guard Redgrave's still form growing slightly closer. The sun caught the brass buttons of his uniform, making them shine like stars. Alex fixed his eyes on them, using their gleam as a guide through the sea of moving bodies around him. "Just a little further," he whispered to himself, his mother's encouraging voice playing in his head. "You can do it, darling. Just a little more." But as he finally drew near enough to see the guard's face clearly, a new voice cut through the crowd, rough, slurred, and far too close. "Oi, what have we got here then? Lost, are you, little mate?" Alex froze, his heart nearly stopping as a large shadow fell across him. The voice belonged to a man who smelled strongly of alcohol, his unsteady movements suggesting he'd had far too much to drink. As the man's hand reached toward him, Alex realized, with growing terror, that he might have found something worse than being lost. Through it all, Guard Redgrave remained motionless at his post, but his peripheral vision had caught every detail of the unfolding scene. And beneath his ceremonial stillness, every combat-honed instinct was screaming that the situation was about to explode. The drunk man swayed as he loomed over Alex, his bloodshot eyes narrowing in what he probably thought was a friendly expression. "Come here, kid. Uncle Tommy'll help you find your mum." His large hand closed around Alex's thin arm, fingers digging in with clumsy force that made the boy wince. "No, please," Alex tried to pull away, his voice trembling. Don't be like that." The man's grip tightened, his attempt at a friendly tone slipping into something harder. "Just trying to help, aren't I?" The smell of alcohol grew stronger as he pulled Alex closer, making the boy's eyes water. Spittle flew from his mouth as he spoke, his bloodshot eyes darting between the guard's impassive face and his own trapped wrist. Years of bar fights and street brawls had taught him to read opponents, but there was something different here. Something in the guard's bearing that spoke of real combat experience, of battles fought far from tourist-filled courtyards. A palette of emotions crossed the drunk's face, confusion, anger, and finally, the first flickers of fear as he realized he'd stumbled into something far beyond his usual drunken confrontations. The pristine white glove gripping his wrist might as well have been iron for all his attempts to break free. A few nearby tourists had begun to notice the scene. An elderly woman took half a step forward, concern etched on her face, but the man's size and obvious intoxication made her hesitate. Others were looking around uncertainly, that peculiarly human paralysis of not wanting to get involved, warring with their instinct to help. "Let go!" Alex's voice was barely a whisper now, tears streaming down his face. "You're hurting me." He tried again to pull away, but the man's grip only tightened further. "Stop squirming!" The man's pretense at friendliness vanished entirely. "Ungrateful little—" His free hand rose, and Alex flinched, expecting a blow. It never came. The drunk's hand froze mid-swing as a ripple of shocked gasps moved through the watching crowd. Several women covered their mouths in horror, while a group of young men took half steps forward, their own protective instincts warring with uncertainty about how to help. A father quickly turned his young daughter's face away, shielding her from what seemed about to become a scene of violence. But before anyone else could react, a white-gloved hand had materialized on the drunk's wrist, gripping it with the kind of precise force that only years of combat training can perfect. Guard Redgrave, no longer a statue but a coiled spring of controlled power, had moved from his post with fluid grace that belied his ceremonial uniform. His bearskin cap hadn't even shifted with the sudden movement, a testament to years of disciplined training. "Release the boy." Redgrave's voice was quiet, but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had faced far worse threats than a drunken bully. The words seemed to drop into the sudden silence like stones into still water, each syllable weighted with dangerous promise. "Now." The afternoon sun caught the brass buttons of Redgrave's tunic as he maintained his grip, the gleam somehow making the scene more intense. Tourist cameras had lowered, their owners sensing that this was no longer a moment for holiday snapshots. This was something else entirely, a moment when ceremony gave way to raw protection. The drunk tried to jerk his arm free, his face contorting with anger at this unexpected intervention. Alcohol fumes wafted from him as he snarled, "Mind your own business, toy soldier. I'm helping the kid, aren't I?" His free hand balled into a fist, but something in Redgrave's stance, the perfect balance, the combat-ready poise, made him hesitate. Redgrave's grip tightened with mathematical precision, finding pressure points that made the man's fingers spasm open, releasing Alex's arm. In the same smooth motion, the guard moved the boy behind him, his body becoming a scarlet wall between Alex and danger. "Last warning." Redgrave's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the quiet tone. "Step back." The drunk's face flushed darker with rage and embarrassment. "You can't touch me, you're just for show, you lot. Playing at soldiers while—" His words cut off in a grunt as Redgrave moved again, this time using the man's own drunken momentum to spin him into a controlled hold. The guard's movements were precise, measured, not a hint of anger or excessive force, just the clean efficiency of someone very good at their job. "On your knees," Redgrave commanded, applying subtle pressure that gave the drunk no choice but to comply. "Palace security is already on their way. I suggest you don't make this worse for yourself." The crowd had drawn back, forming a circle around the scene. Some had their phones out, but most were simply watching in stunned silence as years of myth about the Queen's Guard being purely ceremonial were shattered before their eyes. Behind Redgrave, Alex had stopped crying, his eyes wide as he watched his protector control the situation with calm authority. The guard's free hand moved slightly, a subtle gesture keeping the boy safely in place while maintaining his hold on the subdued drunk. "Bloody hell!" the man slurred, finally seeming to realize the seriousness of his situation. "I didn't mean nothing by it, was just trying to—" "Save it for the police," Redgrave cut him off as two palace security officers pushed through the crowd. His voice carried the weight of every warrior who had ever stood guard over the innocent. "Some lines you don't cross." As security took custody of the drunk, Redgrave turned to Alex, kneeling down to the boy's level while maintaining a vigilant awareness of their surroundings. The movement was smooth, controlled. Even in breaking protocol, he maintained the dignity of his uniform and position. "You're safe now," he said softly, his voice gentler than anyone might have expected from a Queen's Guard. "Let's find your mother." "Thank you." Alex whispered, his small voice shaking but stronger now that he felt safe. His eyes were fixed on Redgrave's face, studying the features that had been just part of a statue-like figure moments ago. The guard's expression was kind but alert, his training evident in how he continuously scanned their surroundings while focusing on the child. "You're very brave," Redgrave said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had calmed soldiers in combat zones. "Can you tell me your mother's name?" His white-gloved hand remained reassuringly on Alex's shoulder, the touch gentle but secure. "Sarah," Alex managed, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "Sarah Bennett. She was wearing a red coat and—" His voice caught as fresh tears threatened to fall. "She told me to hold on tight, but the crowd was so strong." Redgrave nodded, his expression showing understanding rather than judgment. "It's not your fault, lad. Sometimes even the strongest grip can't fight a crowd." He turned slightly, catching the eye of one of the palace security officers, who had just finished dealing with the drunk. A few quick hand signals, learned in military service, conveyed the essential information. The security officer nodded and spoke into his radio, setting the official search in motion. "All units, we have a missing parent situation. Sarah Bennett, red coat, looking for her son. Last seen near the East Gate during the crowd surge." Redgrave's attention returned to Alex, noting how the boy trembled slightly despite trying to be brave. "While they look for your mother, you'll stay right here with me. No one will harm you." The promise carried the weight of years of service, of battles fought and comrades protected. A young woman stepped forward from the crowd, her uniform marking her as a palace tour guide. "Guard Redgrave. I can take him to the visitor centre if you need to return to your post." Her offer was kind but uncertain, seeing the way Alex's hand had instinctively gripped the guard's tunic. "That won't be necessary," Redgrave replied, his tone courteous but firm. "The boy stays with me." Something in his voice discouraged any further discussion. His eyes met Alex's, conveying silent reassurance. Sometimes duty means protecting, more than just stone walls. Alex managed a small smile, his trust in the guard absolute, after witnessing his intervention. "Mummy says the guards protect everything important." "Your mother sounds very wise," Redgrave said, even as he processed the radio chatter in his earpiece, reporting search progress from different sections of the palace grounds. "And right now, nothing is more important than getting you back to her safely." The crowd had maintained a respectful distance, many of them touched by the sight of the usually stoic guard showing such gentle care for a frightened child. Parents held their own children closer, understanding the terror Alex's mother must be feeling. "Alex!" A distant cry carried across the courtyard. "Alex, where are you?" The boy's head snapped up, hope lighting his face. "Mummy!" His voice was stronger now, carrying the certainty of someone who knew help was at hand. Redgrave lifted Alex easily, settling him on his hip while maintaining perfect military posture. The elevation would make it easier for both mother and child to spot each other across the crowd. His white-gloved hands supported Alex securely, the same hands that had subdued a threat moments ago, now ensuring a small boy's safety. "Again," he encouraged softly. "Call to her." "Mummy!" Alex's voice rang out clearer this time, carrying over the heads of the gathered tourists. "Mummy, I'm here, with the guard." The crowd began to part, people moving aside as a woman in a red coat pushed through, her face tear-stained but hopeful. The moment she spotted Alex in Redgrave's arms, her expression transformed from desperation to pure relief. Guard Redgrave stood tall, his bearing every inch the Queen's guard, despite the small boy in his arms. He had sworn an oath to protect, and today that duty extended beyond ancient stones and ceremonial traditions to something far more precious, the safe reunion of a mother and her child. "Alex!" Sarah Bennett's voice broke as she ran forward, her arms already reaching for her son. Guard Redgrave lowered Alex carefully, his movements precise even in this emotional moment. The boy flew into his mother's embrace, both of them crying now as they held each other tightly. "I was so scared, Mummy, but the guard saved me." Alex's words tumbled out between sobs. "A bad man tried to grab me, but Guard Redgrave stopped him." Sarah looked up at Redgrave, her eyes brimming with tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, one arm still holding Alex close, while the other reached out toward the guard. "Thank you for protecting my boy." Redgrave stood at parade rest, his bearing dignified, yet somehow gentler than his usual ceremonial stance. "Your son showed great courage, ma'am." He kept his head and sought proper help. His voice carried the same quiet authority that had subdued the drunk, but now it held a warmth that made several onlookers brush away tears. Alex turned in his mother's arms, his small face still showing traces of tears, but now beaming with admiration. "He moved so fast, Mummy, like a superhero, but better because he's real." The boy's natural resilience was already asserting itself, the terror of moments ago fading in the safety of his mother's embrace and the guard's protective presence. "The police would like to speak with you both," Redgrave said softly, nodding toward two officers who had approached respectfully. "They'll need a statement about the incident with the intoxicated individual." His eyes met Sarah's, conveying silent reassurance that everything would be handled properly. Sarah nodded, standing with Alex still held close. "Of course." She paused, seemingly struggling to find words adequate for the situation. "I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't been there—" "A guard's duty is to protect," Redgrave replied simply. His white-gloved hand moved once, briefly touching Alex's shoulder. "Some things are more important than protocol." As the police began gently leading Sarah and Alex aside to take their statements, Redgrave turned with military precision to resume his post. The afternoon sun caught his brass buttons as he moved, and Alex called out one last time, "Thank you, Guard Redgrave, I'll never forget you." The guard allowed himself the smallest of smiles, barely visible unless you knew where to look, before resuming his ceremonial position. His eyes fixed forward, his posture perfect, as if he had never moved. But there was something different now, something the watching crowd could sense. This was not just a man playing at soldier. This was a guardian in the truest sense, someone who understood that real duty sometimes required breaking the rules to uphold a higher law. The gathered tourists began to disperse, many wiping eyes and holding their own children closer. They had come expecting to see a ceremonial guard, a tourist attraction, a piece of living history. Instead, they had witnessed something far more meaningful, a moment when tradition and humanity met, when duty transcended protocol, when a guard proved that true protection went beyond standing still. As the courtyard returned to its usual rhythm, Redgrave maintained his watch. His white-gloved hands held his rifle with perfect precision. His bearskin cap cast its shadow exactly as regulations demanded. But now everyone who passed understood. Behind the ceremonial stillness stood a man ready to move in an instant if duty called, a guardian not just of stone and ceremony, but of all that truly needed protecting. What would you have done in Guard Redgrave's position? When does protecting those in need outweigh traditional rules and protocol? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about the Royal Guards who stand as living symbols of both duty and compassion. Hit that bell icon to ensure you never miss our daily uploads. Also, check out our second channel, Guard Patrol, linked in the pinned comments. We upload daily at the same time on both channels, bringing you even more incredible stories of courage and discipline. Don't miss out. Subscribe to both. Check out our other videos appearing on your screen right now to discover more moments where duty meets humanity. Until next time, remember that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is break from tradition to protect what truly matters. See you tomorrow, same time, with another incredible story that will warm your heart and restore your faith in humanity.